Most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal U.S. court rules, and this will in no way be immediately overturned when it's inevitably appealed. Welcome to the Between the Lies podcast, your weekly lesson on how to approach an uncertain world with positivity and balance. I'm Nicky P, here with my good friends and money brains Luke Tatum and Rob Brayton from Perfect Spiral Capital. Gentlemen, are you ready to pay more either way?
No, I'm not, but I don't think I have a whole lot of choice in the matter. So, here we are, and that's a pretty good starting point for the conversation, I'd say. We're already paying more, various different ways at the grocery store, whenever we're buying anything, consumer electronics, any of that good stuff. We're already paying more. And, to pretend that tariffs are some uniquely different thing that don't have anything to do with that is just a little weird. We have some really, really weird commentary on these topics here lately. But Rob, what's your first take on this?
Yeah, it's just another tax, right? It's no different. Like whatever we want to call it, we're still going to pay more. At the same time, and what we were talking before, one of the things that I think is so crazy about all this is it just feels like a repeat. Like tariffs were announced and they were repealed and now they're announced, and it just kind of has that same feel for the average person. So it's like, are these real? Are they not? So either way, we're gonna end up paying something. It's just a matter of where it comes from, I suppose.
Yeah, I watch a tech news show called Tech Linked on YouTube. And I think it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And for a long time there, it was every single episode, it's some change about what tariffs are. It's like, so actually there is a tariff over here, or actually it's less. And, we've been doing this all year. It's months and months and months of what our price is going to be. What are they, who's going to pay them? Like, it's just, we never stop talking about this. And so I hear you loud and clear. It's like, could we move on? Could we talk about something else? But not if they're going to have a huge change, right? I mean, according to one of the articles we pulled for this episode, this is the CNBC article. It says, before the court action, Trump's tariffs were set to affect roughly 69% of U.S. goods imports, according to the Tax Foundation. If struck down, they would go down to just 16% of goods coming to the U.S. So, I mean, it is a big change if this actually sticks and it doesn't just get flipped at the Supreme Court.
And I don't think the percentage does a real credit because I believe it gave us some projected amounts on there as well that were a little bit ludicrous to think of.
Right. I mean, the White House, of course, is running victory laps all the time these days about how much in tax revenue is coming in and how, we're going to replace the income tax and stuff. And it's like, does anybody know how to use a calculator except me? Am I the only person in the world that knows how to add enough zeros to trillion? Like,
well, to say, I believe Trump had said 8 trillion is what we've brought in so far via tariffs.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So it doesn't even make any sense to
No.
me. So now, obviously, from the school of thought that we come from, yes, we have a very narrow view of what tariffs are and how those affect people, which generally it's just an extra tax on you. The pushback that I see, and this is also to a degree why we keep seeing it change and why you keep hearing, this and this and this, is because the tariffs do not exist in a vacuum. They're part of a broader, well, you can agree with it or disagree, they're part of a broader negotiation strategy that Trump's using with other nations. So, and largely what I've heard is that they have actually worked out to great effect, especially in some places like Europe, where we've basically been getting raked over the coals for the entirety of our time dealing with them, the EU in particular. But while, yes, they are a direct tax on us necessarily, does that affect trade in ways that, let's say, other nations kind of have to find workarounds for. Like, they can't just have us not buying goods, so they have to change other things to basically kind of balance out the changes that their own economy is going to have to go through.
Yeah, and I think just like, I mean, tariffs, taxes, whatever we want to call them, everything has a knock-on effect in some way, shape, or form. So if we think about, well, company A is going to be importing this good into the United States. They know they're going to have to pay 20% more to get it here, right? Well, ultimately, the consumer pays for everything. So either that cost is going to be directly translated down the line to us in some way, or the company says, can we cut 20% out of our cost, make a cheaper product, and sell it for the same price? Either way, who's losing in that deal? Like, the average person is, right? So, that's part of it that kind of stinks.
That is, if you're talking specifically about like the companies themselves making the changes. But we're once again, we're talking about this at the global level, when between international policies, where like the countries are the ones all making the changes, and they have to see their revenue, bottom line function. So we see them offsetting things in their own way to, I guess, I'm going to say the horrible phrase, balance trade.
Let's not talk about trade balance. I mean, so that's a whole silly thing. I guess we do at some point have to talk about it, but I hear what you're saying, right? It's a negotiating tool. It's a way to put pressure on this country or whatever, and it's to try to get something else. Is this a negotiating tool to get something else out of that same country? Well, we'll lower our tariffs, but you have to do this, right? Because any country that I say is going to have a whole bunch of associated, gut reactions from the crowd, right? So anybody watching this, okay, if I say Russia, some people are going to hate me. If I say China, some people are going to hate me just for bringing up the country, right? So let's do the Principality of Liechtenstein, because I don't think anyone has strong feelings about them, right? So Liechtenstein, let's say, is going to send goods over here, but then we increase our tariffs. Those manufacturers over in Liechtenstein or wherever, they may not export at all, right? It may increase their cost of doing business. They may have to find domestic alternatives for things. They may not import as much because there's not as much dollars leaving, entering their country and vice versa. Those kinds of things. There's a whole web of different repercussions that can occur. And that's just at the business owner level, right? You've got the governments themselves trying to position for favors and all these things too, which, we're not the government. I guess I should say that. It's a great opportunity to go into that. Like, I'm not in Congress or the House of Representatives. I don't sit in the White House. I'm not the government, right? Just because I vote or whatever. In fact, I don't. But it doesn't make me a participant, in the government. If the government gets cool favors from Liechtenstein or China or Russia or any other country, it doesn't help me, and so I don't necessarily care as a consumer what kind of benefits maybe we're negotiating and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's like Trump introduces something, it gets reversed. Oh, we're going to lower the tariffs. Oh, we're going to meet in the middle. Oh, we're going to do all this different stuff. But what does all that mean? It means revenue for the government. What is the government doing with its revenue these days? Anything that benefits me? No. And so I just have to bring it down to the you and me level and say, I don't care. I wish they'd cut it out. Could they all just take a permanent holiday? So that's my official position.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate where you're coming from with that, Luke. I think that in this situation, you have the president trying to operate from obviously the negotiation aspect, like you guys were talking about before. I think there's a lot of that posturing, a lot of those things happening. At the same time, I see this as, well, we have a revenue problem, is kind of how the president's kind of thinking about it from a business angle. The the biggest issue and the elephant in the room is we have a spending problem. That's the biggest problem that we have at a federal level. If the spending is cut, and I'm talking not 5% or 10%, I'm talking like half the size or more. That's what we really need. And then we don't have hardly any of these problems at all. And I think that's the biggest issue is you have a large class of society, unfortunately, that has become reliant on some of these things from the government. In some cases, it's not even by their own accord. It's just that's how things have evolved. Or it's been maybe manipulation in order to have them vote in a certain way so that the people in charge can feel like they're doing the right thing for the people. But regardless, if we attack one side of it but don't attack the other side, we're not going to fix a thing. It's only going to get worse for the average person, which, again, the whole point of this isn't to be like gloom and doom. The reality is like, we have to look at it. And these are the ways that we have to look at it. There's two sides, in like anybody who's maybe willing to think outside the box, there is a third side on the coin. And that third side is one that's often misunderstood or not looked at. And that's something that we have to be thinking about here is, well, what if we did both things? Maybe we could fix some problems here.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just jump back in, Nick, I feel like it's so funny that, the White House, Trump, whoever runs the White House, Twitter page and whatnot, will post these things all the time about how many billions of dollars of revenue are coming in from these tariffs. And as though it's going to somehow solve the problem, right? So to your point, Rob, spending is the problem. Like the government has such a spending addiction. When you hear about cuts, it's like a proposed 5% cut in increase in spending over the next 10 years, like some ridiculously protracted and non-cut. That is not solving anything. And yet people lose their minds about it. And so, the military spending's out of control, everything. I could just list every major sector of the government. There's no point in naming names, right? Because all of it is overbloated and it's spending too much. And so if you look at tariff revenues, we just broke another record for monthly tariff revenues. August is like $33 billion in tariff revenue is what they're claiming. And I don't have enough information to dispute that. But we've entertained the idea of cutting the income tax or eliminating the income tax if there's enough tariff revenue. Is that going to happen with $33 billion? No. No, it's not. The government spends so much money every single day that I think $33 billion is enough to last like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, I was just watching a podcast earlier this week. The last 2 months, it's $1 trillion in deficit. $33 billion does nothing. I mean, that's the problem. It's this massive bloat that we have to get rid of. And that's deficit spending, right? That's not even the budget itself. So it's $1 trillion. I mean, these huge numbers are thrown around. It's unbelievable. And most people have no clue just how big that is. And I mean, it's so significant that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around when you start putting it into something physical, for example.
You remember in the early 2000s when we would have like all these infographic type animation videos that people would share around from, the Heritage Foundation or whoever. And it'd be like, this is a pallet with $100,000 on it. And then it zooms out. And then here's how much it would take to be $1 million. And here's how much is $1 billion, And then you have the daily amount of spending from Washington, D.C. And it's like 6 Empire State Buildings or some crazy thing. It's like, it just beggars belief. You cannot wrap your mind around it. Nobody can like appreciate and think about how big even 1 million is, right? You can't think of 1 million of anything. You look out at like all the pine needles in a national forest or something. You're like, that's a really big amount. You don't see 1 million or 1 billion or whatever. You see that is too many to ever wrap my mind around. And that's what we're dealing with here. And I think the government takes advantage of that, right? Oh, I don't know how big $1 trillion is, so I guess it's okay. It seems like that's how people feel.
Well, that's just rehashing the Couve playbook of, hey, let's keep flashing these big numbers because people don't know how to contextualize them, and we'll scare them. So let me ask the question. Obviously, this whole show is about keeping positive and trying to not participate in the negative parts of the economy that we don't want to participate in. What does that look like right now? And, are there ways to kind of push back against this thrust?
Well, I would say that you have to just keep your head on straight, in times like these. Like it always goes back to that sphere of control kind of thing, right? Do I have the ability to directly set tariff policy? Obviously not. Nobody on this podcast has that ability. And so you have to just say, okay, can't control that. CPI is doing whatever, tariff policy is doing whatever. If you know something is coming, can you capitalize on that knowledge, right? If you know that tariffs are going to take effect on something that you need, if you're a business owner doing steel, manufacturing, obviously you should buy steel when it's cheaper. There are simple things that you can do in those sorts of scenarios to prepare yourself. But in order to be in a position to do those sorts of things, you need to have capital. You need to have powder dry, so to speak. You need to be liquid, be positioned, and not have all of your money tied up in, speculative investment, right? You need to have hard assets. You need to have things you can touch and use. And so certainly that's how we live our lives. Real estate, things like that are great to just hold value. And keep handy and keep available. And that doesn't matter. Like you can't put a tariff on land, for example. So that's one thing. Rob, do you got anything else you would recommend here?
I think you're you're going down the right path, right? And one of the things that was kind of coming up to my mind was, what if somebody doesn't have that in place, right? So what can I do? What's in my control? Well, first of all, you have control over your income. So, but what are you doing with that income? How much control of the flow of that money that's going to flow through your system from your money? How much of that are you going to retain? What are you going to do with that? Where's that going to flow to? The average American makes maybe $50,000 after taxes, if they're lucky, in most cases. So, you have two couples working, that's $100,000 that are going to flow through your system this year. What do you have in place to start controlling that flow? Because if you can, and you start redirecting that into a system you own and control, you can do exactly like what Luke was just talking about. You can start to create a situation where you have the powder dry. You can maybe buy your food in bulk. We buy a cow every year, right? We get it from a local farmer. These are things that people can really do that actually help create a better system. It just takes, but we all have to act. It can't be just one or two people. It's a lot of people operating together. And, ultimately speaking, the government is supposed to report to us.
Well, in the words of Dave Smith, why don't you walk out to that cop on the street and tell him, hey, you work for me, buddy. See what happens to you.
Fair point, right? Monopoly on violence, that's a whole different topic. But yes, I think but I'm not saying go out and do something illegal necessarily, but I'm saying we can start to control what we can control. And by doing that, that does give us hope. And I can certainly say, even from my own personal situation and others that I've worked with, things are getting better for us and for other people, despite the fact that things are more expensive. Sure, that happens, but
this, and maybe this is too big of a pivot, but this takes me back to, Rob, to like over the last 10, 15 years, when people have built a big audience, you build a business or something on a platform, like a social media platform, like a Facebook or something like that. And then, they updated their policies. You can't be on there anymore. You didn't own that. You didn't really control that. You just had a kind of a permission slip to play on the Facebook platform for a while, right? And so it just goes back to that whole, you know, your skills you directly control, right? You could spend money, some of that $100,000 in that example you gave, building a new skill set, leveling up some skills you already have, getting some new certifications if you're in tech or something, like different things. It depends on what you're doing. But your ability to earn income is the most valuable thing that you have. And so how are you using it? And are you reinvesting? If you think of yourself, your physical self as a business, I know that's a little weird, but your business, yourself, can get better every year, every day, every week, what have you. How are you doing that? Or are you just hoping that nobody changes the government policy on your particular sector, right? Are you an employee? Or are you operating in some of the other cash flow quadrants, right? Do you have some investments? Do you own a business? Are you doing anything else? Or are you just clocking in, clocking out, and hoping for the best? And so if it's the latter, if you're just clocking in, clocking out, could you change that? What are you interested in? What can you start to direct some of your cash flow towards to kind of get out of that trap, the so-called rat race? So, investment or putting money into a, cash flowing policy like we do with our infinite banking concept, ideas and all that. That's just one piece of the puzzle. We can't help you if you don't change your mind, if you don't change how you're thinking about it.
Yeah. On that front, Luke, I would just say, rethink your thinking, right? That's something that we have to do in these situations, is think differently. And what is our number one asset? Our number one asset is ourselves. So if we reinvest in ourselves, that level of return could be exponentially huge if you think differently about the situation. So we have to really challenge ourselves. If I can't just say, well, that's the way it is. It should be, well, how do I go get it? How do I make it happen? Because we can insulate ourselves from a lot of these happenings and provide real hope for ourselves and our next generations if we do it. And I think that's the thing that excites me the most about what we do, is working with people and helping them get into that mindset. And when you see that light bulb turn on for somebody, it is unbelievable. I mean, it's probably one of the best feelings I've had in the world, is someone has changed their life from that point forward because they now are thinking differently. And that is true. That's truly exciting. And I think that's really what is capable for all of us if we're willing to think differently. And that's really what it comes down to.
Right there with you. No, I love it. We could talk about mindset stuff all day, but it's so good. It's so good when people actually snap out of it and get into some other modes of thinking.
Gentlemen, why do you take us out today? Because I think we're all reaching that point where you can only talk about tariffs for so long. What do you got for
it's
us?
a little bit of a dry topic. Yeah. No, so thanks so much, as always, for joining us on the Between the Lies podcast. If you watch this full episode, then you're clearly interested in money. We've got a free toolkit to help you demystify the future of your money. Lots and lots of free resources in there. So head on over to perfectspiralcapital.com/podcast, get your free toolkit, and we'll see what we can do to help you. Thanks so much for watching.